Exotica was a musical genre most popular from the late 50s to the early 60s, in which Western composers produced albums allegedly emulating the music of foreign countries, particularly Asian and more tropical locales. Naturally, the music produced wasn't actually genuine, instead being more like slightly ethnic-tinged, easy-listening music. The genre peaked in the very late 1950s, before very rapidly falling into obscurity as it was replaced by surf music and early rock and roll during the 1960s. So why am I telling you all this? So I can talk about Japanese synth pop! In fact, Exotica and its faux foreignness play a vital role in the conception of the founding fathers and undisputed masters of the genre, the Yellow Magic Orchestra. Now, I know what you're thinking here. Isn't that name kinda racist? Well, that's actually exactly the point of it. Band leader Haruomi Hosono was fascinated with the whole idea of Exotica, and so the entire conception of the Yellow Magic Orchestra, which at this point was intended to be a one-off project, was based around a combination of Exotica, synth pop, funk, and Japanese folk music. With the band name itself being both a spoof on the kind of title you would have seen on an Exotica album, and a subtle mockery of the black magic fad that was big in Japan at the time. The other members of the band were bassist and keyboard player Ryuichi Sakamoto, and drummer and lead vocalist Yukihiro Takahashi. This was originally supposed to be a one-off project, but the first album turned out to be insanely successful, and so the next year they did another one, 1979's Solid State Survivor, which was even more successful than the first, and to this day is the most successful YMO album. Although that said, this band's entire discography is fantastic. BGM and Technodelic are fantastic, and Naughty Boys is amazing. Honestly, even the house album they did after they got back together in the 90s is pretty good. However, the album we're going to talk about today is the Yellow Magic Orchestra album that started it all, way back in 1978. Now, I will clarify that there are two versions of this album. Unlike most of the subsequent YMO albums, this one actually saw release in the United States. And as is the case, I'm convinced with most foreign albums in the 1960s to the 1980s, there exists a heavily butchered American version of this album that was remixed and has some different vocals. We're reviewing the Japanese edition because thankfully they come as just one set nowadays, although honestly I would rather just have the Japanese version. Computer Game is a very interesting little opening song, sounding very much like what its title implies, with this little motif of what I think is Chopin's Funeral March that repeats throughout the song, but effectively it's just an intro into the next piece. A synth-pop cover of Martin Denny's Exotica classic, Firecracker. And what can I say? This is one of those covers that completely overshadows the original. Obviously the synth work in this song is excellent, but can I also say that I love the piano here. SIMOON is pretty cool. The longest song on the album and a slow, kind of plodding electronic march that just sort of chills along pleasantly for the entirety of its runtime. And honestly, can I just say at this point that it's interesting that we remember music like this and like this. As synth pop, but when you go back to the very root of the genre, you find music like this. And like this. The intro to Cosmic Surfin' has haunted me ever since I heard this song for the first time, because I swear some game on the NES or SNES ripped this off for its soundtrack, which is not as unrealistic as you might think. The YMO were actually highly influential in the development of video game music, and in fact, there exists a Sega arcade game from the 80s where the soundtrack is literally just Raideen from Solid State Survivor. And so we end the first side of the album with another version of Computer Game, which is about the same as the first one. I really don't have anything else to say about it that I didn't say the first time. And side 2 opens with probably my favorite song on this entire album. The main theme of the song is already pretty cool, with some great synth work and an awesome funky bass line. But then it goes into this jammy section, and the piano is just amazing. It's one of the most beautiful passages in this band's entire discography, and easily my favorite moment on the entire album. Although I should add that when this album was brought over to America, the American record producers for some reason felt the need to put these weird female vocals in this part of the song. I have no idea why. This song, the title of which I believe is pronounced La Femme Chinoise, although I think I just butchered that, is my second favorite song on the album. And is probably the piece here that most closely resembles what we would call synth pop today. Although there are no vocals for most of the song, towards the end when the guitar, the only one on the album by the way, comes in, we get some awesome vocal hooks from Takahashi. La Femme Chinoise fades out into this song, which is fun, but is essentially just an intro for the next song. Mad Poirot, I probably just butchered that too, by the way. I cannot do French. Give me German and maybe, but I cannot do French. Is an utterly fantastic instrumental track and a great way to close out this album. And then Mad Poirot flows into Acrobat, a very brief song that reprises the themes of Computer Game and brings the album as a whole to a close. This album is absolutely fantastic, and I have nothing but good things to say about this, and for that matter, every other Yellow Magic Orchestra album that I've ever heard. They're all fantastic. Even if, like I said before, I do think that they peaked on this and Solid State Survivor, this album takes the early synth pop thing that bands like Kraftwerk did amazingly and adds an entire different level of intricacy and orchestration to it. There's a density to this music that I find thrilling. And if I'm going to be completely honest here, I like the Yellow Magic Orchestra more than I like Kraftwerk, by a really, really big margin. And it's unfortunate that they are so obscure in the English-speaking world. And I'm hopeful that this video, in its own small way, will help to alleviate that situation, if only within my very small circle of people who follow me.